Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the Football Tribe UG channel. Robert Kesakos is your usual suspect. Welcome back to yet another live podcast on your favorite football updates channel. It's a pleasure to be back with you on this beautiful Friday night, the 3rd of April 2026. It's 37 minutes past the hour of 9 p.m. here in Kampala, Uganda. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, and whatever it is there, it could be any other greeting for those of you that join us from the different parts of the world. Thank you so much for choosing to be part of the Football Tribe UG channel. As I had promised that on Friday, we'll do come early, and we are back within our usual hours after the last 2 weeks where we have not been here at 9 p.m. We've been coming at 11 p.m. over the last 2 Fridays, but we are back with our sort of a 9 p.m. Friday broadcast to review what is to come in the weekend, as we did partly in the morning. We talked about Manchester City's game against Liverpool. We talked about Barcelona, Atletico de Madrid. We talked about that game, among other things. Now, of course, a lot has sort of since happened. For those of you that have never missed out on anything that we do put out on the channel, you must have already noticed that we put out a video earlier on regarding Enzo Fernandez, because he has been suspended by Chelsea following his comments in which he did allude that he will assess his options come the end of, maybe perhaps after the World Cup. We will see. In other words, he said we shall see what happens. He did not necessarily say that maybe he was going to leave the club or signal anything in that regard, but yeah, it may have been interpreted as such, but that is not the case, at least according to his agent, Javier Pastore. We'll be talking about Javier Pastore, who is Enzo Fernandez's agent, who is not pleased with the disciplinary action that Chelsea have taken. And for, like I said, it's such a hot topic. It's such a hot topic in regards to the context. First of all, because when the words first came out, the manager defended him, saying maybe some of his words may have been misconstrued to mean things that he had not intended to say. And now, fast forward, because he did another interview, even though he did not mention that he would want to join Real Madrid, he simply mentioned Real Madrid, the city, the side. So he's since been penalized for that. Anyways, we are going to digest all that in tonight's broadcast. So please, keep it locked on the Football Tribe UG channel, and you'll get all the proceedings in that regard. Just having our audios tested on another device just to make sure everything checks out well and that we are in the clear just in case. So, those of you that are just joining us, do me the absolute honor and favor and like the podcast, before we proceed any further. But I hope you've had a wonderful day. It's been a good Friday. It's the way of the cross if you're a Catholic or if you're Christian, depending on how your church marks the day. We hope you had a wonderful one, really, really. So those are the topics that we shall be focusing on for the purposes of this broadcast. And for, like I said, for context, we did put out a video earlier on discussing that situation of Enzo Fernandez in regards to his club penalizing him and giving him a too-much suspension. That's according to the head coach, Liam Marcinia, who did reveal to the media in his pre-match press conference ahead of their tie against Port Vale in the quarterfinals of the FA Cup. He did say that Enzo Fernandez had crossed the line and therefore has been sanctioned or penalized by the club, giving him a too-much suspension, and therefore won't be part of that quarterfinal game in the FA Cup against Port Vale, as well as the game against Manchester City. And if, for those of you that are yet to watch the video, I'm not going to be a spoiler for you. You can go ahead and watch it on the channel where we talk about this topic in full detail. But I did mention something at the tail end of that very video, that I had concerns or I had a question on what it would imply on the player side, that whereas Chelsea may be pleased with what they've done in taking disciplinary action, in trying to keep law and order within their own camp, it begs the question of what it means to the player. If he feels that he was 100% justified and in no particular way did he bring his club into disrepute, he may start weighing his options going into the summer. And it's upon that very basis that then we have been compelled to discuss the comments coming in from his agent. That's Javier Pastore. For those of you that can't remember, Javier Pastore is a former footballer himself. He did play for clubs like Paris Saint-Germain. He's only 36 years of age. He's an Argentine born from a place called Cordoba. So he does take care of the affairs of his fellow countryman in Enzo Fernandez. So he did play for clubs like Palermo. He played for PSG. He played for AC Roma. He played for Elche and things like that, and as well as Qatar SC. So that's where he played. But majority of his football was seen at Paris Saint-Germain. That's where he spent most of his years between 2011 and 2018. So yeah, he has come out to sort of defend his client, and as you would ordinarily expect, or as you would expect really, that he would defend his client. But in a way, the way he defends his client is what is really, really interesting or eye-opening or eye-catching for us here on the channel. And we're going to be reviewing some of the comments that he's made in that regard. Okay, briefly, yes. So Enzo Fernandez's agent has come out to say, Enzo, apologies, just a second. Yes, Enzo Fernandez's agent, Javier Pastore, said Enzo wants to apologize if any fan has felt offended. But he's also stressing that he has never spoken to another club or that he wants to leave Chelsea or London. That's what, he said, according to Mario Kotegana there on behalf of The Athletic. He also added that at no point did he show a lack of disrespect towards the club, which is what I was alluding to, his teammates, the fans, or anyone else. The punishment is completely unfair, says the punishment is completely unfair. So there you have it, and says with key games ahead for the Champions League spot. Obviously, we'll be only missing one Premier League game, but of course, it is a very key game for Chelsea in the context of their pursuit for Champions League glory. You must bear that in mind. He goes on to add that we could not reach an agreement over a new deal with Chelsea. Wow, that's very interesting. As Enzo Fernandez's contract still has 6 years to run, we decided not to renew it because the terms weren't right for us, or for the player. Now, again, and in addition, he goes on to say, given what Enzo's capable of today, he deserves much more than he's currently earning. So you can look at the direction of where the conversation is now taking. And this is something that we had anticipated. This is something that we had literally foreseen in the context of this conversation. Why? Because we know the script. We know the script of how this usually ends down. If you're going to take to penalize a player for comments made in that regard or with that breadth. Excuse me. So yeah, really. And of course, the conversation carries on and on as quoted from The Athletic. He adds that our plan after the World Cup is to meet with Chelsea again, and if there is no agreement over a new deal, to explore other options. So there you have it. Now, a lot of times we make this argument. There's no player that is bigger than the club, blah, blah, blah. And that's true. But oftentimes the question is, what is a club? The club is a combination of things. Prime to eat, the fans, the players, the coaching staff, the owners, the stadia or other assets that the club owns. Those are the components of the club. When we say no player is bigger than the club, we say what we tend to imply is that there's no bigger player of greater value than the rest of the other components that make a club. And that's true. But also the fact is that usually when some players leave that sort of it sort of impacts the club negatively or in more ways than anticipated. We have the law of unintended consequences, and this is what we are having with Chelsea taking that decision. First of all, I do not know what measures have been taken inside the Chelsea dressing room. I don't know the kinds of conversation that Liam Rossini has had with his players. But if I were the club, the first action I would be taking in the aftermath of Enzo Fernandez's interviews and that of Marco Correa is to say, look here, guys, we're putting a pause on these interviews for maybe a week, because you cannot put them off indefinitely, even though, okay, you have the powers to do so, but it is not then good for the club, because fans want to connect with the club and the brand must continue to communicate with the rest of the world, you know? So in that space, you then go and highlight a few issues. You provide guiding principles, especially for non-live interviews. I'll give you an example. If I were in Chelsea's shoes, I'd sit the players down and say, look here, guys, you've all read or seen some of the interviews that have been done by Enzo Fernandez and Marco Correa. Whereas they are right to express themselves in the manner in which they did, we found that some of the things they said are not for public consumption, at least for now. That these are the kinds of conversations we would want to have internally. And then you cite the examples and say, Enzo Fernandez, you're the vice captain of the club. When you talk about the admiration of another city like Madrid, it's going to be inferred that you want to move to Real Madrid. And that's not the kind of press that we would want to have around the club at the moment. Our focus is solely on finishing within the top four and possibly winning the FA Cup, finishing the season strong. Marco Correa, you did express your concerns about the club's overall transfer strategy. That's not conversation you have outside of the club, especially in an official interview, you know. That's the kind of conversation we can have internally between you and I, me as the head coach or manager, or with the sporting director, or with the board, or with the owners. We can have that meeting and we have that open engagement, you know. And then you sort of provide those guiding principles. And you say, if you are asking such a question, your answer would sort of have to be within this range, or at least talk about it this way, as opposed to being so blatant in, you know, coming out that way. Then you tackle the big elephant in the room. What's the big elephant in the room? The departure of Enzo Maresca. As the head coach, Liam Rossini, you did not make the decision that the club part ways with Enzo Maresca. But that's a decision that was taken, done, and dusted. It's not going to change. The sooner we catch up with the current status, the better we will be. It is okay to miss him as a person, as a manager, somebody you worked with, obviously. I cannot stop that. But when you question the club's decision to part ways with Enzo Maresca, you're literally questioning my authority of being here. It's like you're saying, I do not deserve to be your head coach. Now, whether you agree with my methods or not, again, that's a conversation we get to have internally, not outside of the club. You get. So, and you sort of provide those guiding principles. So, like we said in that video, and allow me, guys, I think I need to look that video up and sort of provide with you the link down in the description so that if you're interested in watching it or catching it after this broadcast, you can always go and, you know, take a shot at it. It's a very short video, by the way, only about 11 minutes, so you can always go and watch it. So, with that said, so in that very video, we talk about what the implications of that punishment of suspending Enzo Fernandez could be. And we are already seeing less than even 6 hours of us making that point. We are already seeing the fruits of that. We're already seeing what is happening, you know. We are already seeing the kind of direction, the conversation that is taking, you know. So, and there's no part in where it is good for the club, especially looking from the outside on the inside. Like I said, Chelsea are well within their means to a right to penalize the player, but for a first-time offender, usually I would want to think that the situation could have been handled in perhaps a better way. And when I say in a better way, I also mean to say that you now come up with the guideline to guide some of these players on regards to how they must behave themselves, in regards to how they must behave themselves, on how future interviews should be conducted. You provide those guiding principles because they are not angels. Even the most elite communicators are sometimes hoodwinked or sort of trapped by journalists to say things ordinarily that they wouldn't want to say, or ordinarily that they should be avoid saying. Usually we call it media gifts, or gifts, something like that. So in this particular case, we said, yes, okay, Chelsea have taken their disciplinary measure, but does the player agree with it? And when it comes to punishment, the person that is being punished does not necessarily have to agree with the level of punishment or the size of punishment. But the one thing that should always have a certain level of consensus, it may not be anonymous. Sorry, it may not be unanimous, or it may not be 100% consensus, but there must be a certain level of consensus where the party that is being penalized takes responsibility in acknowledging that perhaps they did wrong. And when I was, again, I will keep making reference to that video because it's very, very crucial that you guys go ahead and watch it. And it's been over there. You can save it and watch it after. Is that when I talked about that, I said, what do you think is going through Enzo Fernandez's mind? First of all, if he feels deep down in his heart that he's done nothing wrong to offend the club or to bring the club in disrepute, and that his comments were fair, or perhaps were misconstrued or misquoted in a way or the other, then he is not going to come to terms with the punishment. In other words, he is going to feel that the punishment does not fit the crime. And once he does feel that way, the next thing he's going to be thinking is getting on the phone with his agent and saying, look here, mate, I know I still have a very long-term contract with these guys, 6 years left to this contract, but I want out of this contract. I want out of it as soon as yesterday. So we are going in the summer, we're going to the World Cup, but your sole focus should be speaking to the right people, getting me out of here. I know it's not going to be easy, but let's try and do it. And you have that honest conversation. I'm not going to try and force a move. I'm not going to refuse to return to training should a deal have not happened by the time we resume for preseason and things like that. I'm not going to try and stage a strike or anything. I'll not do that. I'll stay in line. But at least let's try and find a solution. So that would be the kind of conversation I would anticipate would go on between Javier Pastore and Enzo Fernandez, because the two parties are unpleased with the decision that has been taken. And rightly, like I've read for you some of these comments, and let's revisit some of these comments, particularly where he says, and this is Javier Pastore saying, our plan after the World Cup. First of all, he says they have had discussions with Chelsea over renewing a contract, but that has not happened because the conditions did not feel right. And he goes on to say that a player of Enzo Fernandez's quality and caliber deserves to be earning a lot more. Now, he goes on to add that our plan after the World Cup is to meet with Chelsea again, and if there is no agreement. Now, notice that he doesn't say to try and strike an agreement or a deal to have Enzo Fernandez's contract extended. Whereas in having this meeting with Chelsea, he infers that. But what he highlights is that if there is no agreement, he's quick to say if there is no agreement, to explore other options. Now, what options do you explore if your player is still obligated under contract to play for Chelsea for the next 6 years? You get where it becomes hard? So the player may feel dissatisfied with perhaps the wages he's on, or the situation or the project may no longer be convinced about it, but nonetheless, he still has a valid contract to abide by. He cannot try and force a move away. And we've seen this. We've seen Chelsea trying to force players out of the club. The other side of Chelsea that we are yet to see is trying to force players to stay. You remember Raheem Sterling's case? They wanted him out of the club because they wanted him off their wage bill. At the end of the day, they had to negotiate a certain amount of money for a payout of his contract for him to leave the club and go and join Feyenoord. So with Enzo Fernandez, 6 years left for his contract, I mean, by the time he plays half of those 6 left years, he'll be 28. And by the time he sees out that contract, he will be 31. You see where the conversation is? You know? Now, I do not know the ABCs of the ABCs or the A to Z of that contract. Perhaps if certain conditions are not met, then the player is allowed to leave. And nonetheless, when it comes to that, it's not like because the club has reneged on certain commitments, you walk out of the door and just go away. In other words, you'd be allowed, or perhaps the club is then compelled to accept a reasonable offer from a willing buyer. You know, we know that Real Madrid are interested, but the question has always been, can Real Madrid afford Enzo Fernandez? Obviously, as the biggest football club in the world, they can. The question is, are they willing to pay as much as Chelsea think it would take to purchase a player like Enzo Fernandez out of Chelsea? Only 25 years of age. He's only coming in his prime. We're talking about a World Cup winner here, you know, a FIFA Club World Cup winner, you know. So there's that. So really, it's not as simple as it may sound. And then this is where he talks about the earnings. Given what Enzo is capable of today, he deserves much more than he's currently earning. So this conversation is going to rage on about Enzo Fernandez, but this interview by Javier Pastore, you can see that it's within a space of time, or very, very short time, after Liam Rosina announces the suspension, that he comes out to say this. It's not like he has been hijacked at an event or something, but he had the conversation. And I think there's a lot to read into what is being said in that regard, you know. So we'll have to wait and see how things, go in that regard, in as far as Enzo Fernandez is concerned. Then, quickly, let's move on to Arsenal, because there's also plenty of news coming out of Arsenal. A whole host of players were not seen in training photos or in training ahead of Arsenal's game against Southampton this weekend. And among those players is Pierre Hincapié, Gabriel Magalhaes, Yohan Timber, Martin Zubimendi, Declan Rice, Martin Odegaard, Eberechi Eze, Bukayo Saka, Leandro Trossard, and Noni Madueke. Now, that in itself is worrying. If you're an Arsenal fan, you must be worried with what is just happened. Why? Because whereas the game against Southampton is one that they can play without these players, given how long some of them have been out of action, you'd want some of them to get a few warm-up minutes to have their bodies up and running. For example, Martin Odegaard feels like he's been out for ages. We had hoped, perhaps, that by the end of the international break, he will be back. And maybe he is, maybe not. But he's one of those players, in the absence of Eberechi Eze, if you have any intent and purpose of playing him in the game against Sporting Lisbon, you'd want him available for the game against Southampton to get a few minutes, warm-up minutes. You look at Bukayo Saka. Initially, it was said it was excessive fatigue. He's had almost a fortnight to rest, almost. So he should be back training. You look at a player like Yuan Timber. His injury that he sustained in that 2-0 victory against Everton wasn't reported to be as bad. But now, look, and we almost walking down the path of a month, ballpark, before he returns to action. So, Leandro Trossard, you must feel for this Arsenal side because of what's to come, especially midway next week. So, Mikel Arteta was speaking at the press conference today ahead of their game against Southampton, a very, very crucial game. We start with Arsenal because of their whole injuries. And he talked about Bukayo Saka's form. He said, I'm certain his best form is coming soon. I spoke to him. I said, at the end of everybody, at the end, everybody is going to remember what we've done in the last part of the season. And in this final push of 8 weeks, we are going to deliver individually. We are going to deliver individually. And that's where now we can impact. He also talked about something like every game feeling like a final, or every game has to be played like a final. And like I've said, Arsenal have very little room for error. In the FA Cup, they have no room for error if they want to win it. Why? They're in the quarterfinals. You have a game against Southampton. Win that, find out who your next opponent is, and go to Wembley again and play your game of football. That means if you win the game against Southampton, you're only 2 games away from winning a piece of silverware. Of course, presumably, with the semi-final being a hurdle in its own right. So there's that. 2, when you look at the UEFA Champions League, you are 4 games away from playing a final. And in the final, you're 90 minutes away from winning it, perhaps for the first time for the Arsenal. That would be the wish for majority of Arsenal fans worldwide. But so you can see the significance of every fixture that is coming their way, because whereas those 2 competitions are very, very important, there is one of ultimate importance to them. That's the Premier League. They have a game against FC Bournemouth, and that will come next weekend. There's no room for error in that one, as there will be no room or even the closest of margins for error when they take the trip to the Etihad Stadium in a fortnight from now. So you can see that every little piece of game is going to be very, very important. So maybe the positive news that you can take out of Mikel Arteta's press conference today is something to do with Noni Madueke. He was speaking about Noni Madueke and said, for Noni, he said he was being asked if it is as bad as it looked. He said, no, it is not. It looked really bad. And Noni was really, really worried, especially after what happened to him in his other knee a few weeks ago. And he was out for 6 weeks. But no, he's nowhere near that injury. So there is already good news. So now, there's a video that was posted by a news platform from Australia depicting Arsenal players in training. And in that video, you'd see Ebelechi Eze, you'd see, I think, Martin Odegaard, you'd see, who else? I think Saka. You see many of the Arsenal players that are believed to be injured or that withdrew from their respective national teams, presumably for injury. But it's an old video that has been used to misrepresent or to spread misinformation. They are training with the winter ball. It's no longer winter. So that ball is not being used. But again, it was used as clickbait to generate all these, I don't know, sort of talk in and about Arsenal. And it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate that a news agency of their caliber would try to misconstrue facts to garner, that sort of engagement online. So I, for one, I find that very, very unfortunate. But then it is what it is, So I hope you guys were not woodwinked. And then also speaking about Ebelechi, Eze says Eze is out, or Ebe is out. I cannot put a finger on it because I do not know, because he is a special character. And then on Martin Odegaard and UN Timber availability, he said those are in contention to possibly be in the squad. Then if the goalkeeper tomorrow will be Spanish, and have a name that ends with A. In other words, Kepa Arrizabalaga. That's what they were asking him about. He says, I think tomorrow the goalkeeper is going to be European. He's under 32, right-footed, and speaks a lot, and speaks at least 2 languages. First of all, they know he has Tommy Setford in there. David Raya is under 32, I think, and so his Kepa Arrizabalaga should be 30. And he says they speak 2 languages. The other 2 speak Spanish and possibly English, or even other languages. I don't know. That's typical Mikel Arteta, trying to be cryptic with that. And then, of course, he talks about the importance of the FA Cup, where he talks about huge competition, so related to the history of the club. We are going to play a team that is in a really good moment. They have won so many games recently. They are in a really good moment. You know the expectations, the crowd, the environment they are going to create. So we are ready for that. We want to be at Wembley again. So tomorrow we have the opportunity to do again. So those were some of Mikel Arteta's assertions in the press conference ahead of that game. Now that game is very, very important between Arsenal and Southampton coming on Saturday at 10 p.m. It's important because it's another opportunity for Arsenal to push for a piece of silverware. Whether they are able to get it over the line, that remains to be seen, But we'll just have to wait and see what their exploits will be in the competition. First of all, they'll play a team in Southampton, a team that they have a bone to pick with. And where does the bone come from? You remember sometime, I think, was it March 2023, when Southampton forced Arsenal in 3-3 draw, and being one of the teams that cost them the Premier League title, So clearly, there's a bone to pick. And if anything, Mikel Arteta, I would want to believe, by the way, he did win Manager of the Month for the month of March. Yep. So when you rewind things back in March 2023, this is a period between March and April. On March the 18th, is it 18th, 16th? I think March the 18th, 2023, they shared the spoils with Sporting CP in a 1-1 draw. Eventually, Sporting Lisbon knocked them out of the UEFA Europa League. That's the 2022-2023 campaign. Then on April 21st, they played against Southampton. They shared the spoils in a 3-3 draw. This was a game at the Emirates Stadium. And then the weekend after that, they played away to Manchester City and lost to Man City by 4-1, and eventually lost the Premier League title. Now, in under similar circumstances or fashion, they have to play Southampton. This is going to be April the 4th. They have to play Sporting Lisbon at home on April the 15th. Of course, in between there, having played, Sporting Lisbon away, and then FC Bournemouth at home. And then after that, the game against Manchester City. So the key focus is going to be, how do they handle this period? Contrary to how they dealt with it around the same time, almost 3 years ago, So that's going to be a key thing. So in Arsenal's trip away to St. Mary's Stadium, they do have a bone to pick with the Saints of Southampton because of the circumstances that I've just explained to you. Particularly of that game, you remember Theo Walcott scoring against Arsenal. You remember, I think, Martin Odegaard being among the goal scorers. Thomas, was it Bukayo Saka among them as well for the Arsenal? So the game is of utmost importance to the Arsenal. But I do suspect we could see Kepa Arrizabalaga back in goal, despite of all the criticism, justifiably, that was pelted his way in the aftermath of Arsenal losing the cup final. That's the Carabao Cup final at Wembley. That was prior to the international break. So that is going to be there. We cannot ignore it. But Kepa Arrizabalaga could return in goal. I do suspect, because I do not think Mikel Arteta is going to go for Tommy Setford. And I find it difficult that in that kind of game, he would go with David Raya. So I do have a feeling he may go with his number 2. Meanwhile, the game between Paris Saint-Germain and Toulouse is 1-1. For those of you that are interested in finding out what how that is progressing, So there's that. Okay, I'm trying to see if I can ascertain a source for that game so that we can keep tabs on it because it is still very well in the first half. There's also a game, I think, against between Elche and Rayo Vallecano in the Spanish La Liga. So that one is also ongoing. Matefi Safonov, what have you just done? Okay. So yeah. He fumbled the ball in the area and he was punished. So it's 1-1. That's Safonov. Anyways, Luis Enrique will not be pleased with him on that one. So, like I was saying, Southampton is a very, very important game. But we could see the likes of Christian Mosquera in centre back, Ricardo Carafiori in there, Ben White at right back. I'm thinking we could see Miles Lewis Kelly at left back. We could see Christian Norgard in midfield alongside who? Because the absence of Mikel Merino makes this a little bit complicated. Because could we see a youngster like a Mari Solomon starting this game? Or a Josh Nicholas starting at right back, and then you have Ben White playing in the centre back, and then you push Miles Lewis Kelly to play in midfield. Then Leandro Trossard, Kai Havertz, Max Dorman, and Gabriel Jesus. Gabriel Martinelli just returned from international break, as is Kai Havertz, but that bit of a situation may force Arsenal's hand. But that's the kind of starting lineup I would expect against Southampton. But Mikel Arteta will know one too well not to despise Southampton. Like he rightly puts it, they've won a good number of games in recent times. When it comes to their most previous meetings, of course, this is happening in the Premier League for the 2024-2025 Premier League season. Before they got relegated, Arsenal beat Southampton home and away 2-1 at St. Mary's Stadium and 3-1 at the Emirates Stadium. And then you go back to the 2022-2023 campaign, you'll have Arsenal 3-3 and Southampton 1-1. That's one of the teams that they failed to beat home and away, or they failed to beat up against in that very season. Then the other meetings, you have to go back to the 2021-2022 Premier League season, for which Arsenal won the home game by 3-0 and lost to Southampton by 1-0. So Southampton are not immune to beating Arsenal. In the FA Cup in 2021, the season of 2020-2021, Southampton at home beat up against Arsenal by 1-0 to knock them out of the FA Cup. So you can see that there's a little bit of that history, there's a little bit of that history between the two sides, and Southampton will be confident that we can beat up against this Arsenal side. Because why? We've done it before. We've caused them an upset in the title race. We've beaten them before and knocked them out of an FA Cup. So why not try and do it again? They do have the home advantage, so they will try and exploit that or use that and rally their fans behind them. They have players like Daniel Paratesi, James Bray, Oriol Romeo, Finn Aziz, Ross Stewart, Samuel Edozie, Tom Fellows, those kinds of players. So we should wait for a very, very exciting game between those two sides. Nonetheless, Arsenal want to bounce back as quickly as possible from that defeat against Manchester City, because any poor result, anyway, I think there can only be one result at the end of the game, because it goes into extra time or penalties, whichever way, we'll definitely have to have a winner. But the point I'm trying to make is that Arsenal ought to avoid losing at whatever cost. Why? Because the last thing they would want is to lose 2 games for the first time back to back in this season. And then previously, they've done well to recover from defeats. When they lost to Liverpool, when they lost to Aston Villa, when they lost to Manchester United, now they lost to Manchester City before the international break. And now this is going to come as the earliest opportunity to recover from that. Because once you lose that game, you go with those fevers from the Carabao Cup final to the Southampton game, and then carry them away to Sporting Lisbon, where we saw Sporting Lisbon in their last Champions League outing obliterate Bodo Glimt, released after extra time, beating them by 5-0. They were quite scintillating that game. Francesco Trincao, Luis Suarez, there's a player I'm trying to remember. Oh, his name does elude me, but he looks like Japanese or Korean or something like that. So it's going to be a big game for the Arsenal in that context, because of what it means in pursuit of silverware, because of what it means in terms of their overall season, because of what it means to their form, that they need to bounce back as soon as possible. And Southampton, you do not get a slightly simpler game as opposed to those that come after that for you to bounce back. So, and rightly, like Mikel Arteta put it, regardless of who he fields on that pitch tomorrow at 10 p.m. East African time, it must feel like a final. It must feel like a final, you know? So, that's that with the Arsenal. Moving on, let's move on quickly. We have more news. This is coming in from, it's a goal. The referee has given it, but the appeals for a foul, PSG are leading now by 2-1. You know? Didn't even notice who the actual goal scorer was. Ousmane Dembele was in an offside position. Of course, it will go to VAR. The ball is flicked on by Kivicha Kvaratskhelia to the sort of back post, and Ousmane Dembele taps it right into the back of the net. VAR may have to take a crack at that one, but I do suspect it will get cleared. Now, moving on with the other news is that 3 senior officials have resigned from the Italian Football Federation, and that's head coach Gennaro Gattuso, head of delegation in Gianluigi Buffon, he's resigned. Then the Italian Football Federation president in Gabriele Gravini have all stepped down from their respective roles at the Italian Football Federation. And now Italy are going to be back in the market searching for a head coach who, I don't know, no matter how many head coaches, good, bad, fair, mediocre, elite that they may bring to this Italian national team, their success will feel sporadic, if any, for as long as they do not fix the core issues with Italian football, for as long as they continue not to heed to Roberto Baggio's advice, you know. So they need to make sure, they need to work hard to make sure that that does not become of them, because now they've missed out on the 3rd consecutive World Cup after losing to Bosnia-Herzegovina by 4-1 on post-match penalties that preceded a 1-1 draw. Released Italy were down to 10 men for majority of that game, following the sending off of Alessandro Bastoni. So they must have an honest conversation with them, even though Gennaro Gattuso was distraught, emotional, following that exit. First of all, when Bosnia advanced at the expense of Wales, sorry, Italy or Italian players were seen to jubilate and celebrate, as if to suggest that they had gotten a weaker opponent. And to be honest, without putting the emotions into it, Italy were the stronger team. Italy were the better team, if that first half is anything to go by for the first 40 minutes. Unfortunately for them, they get that red card to Bastoni, and then the game takes is turned on its head, and that's where they lose the plot. Even though it took up to the 79th minute for Bosnia to score to restore parity or to cancel out Moises Kini's 15th-minute goal, they did it anyway. And extra time bore no fruits. Italy missed chances through Moises Kin, I think Locatelli, and who else? Was it Esposito? I don't remember exactly, but there were missed opportunities. I think it was Sandro Tonali. So, with all that said, you felt that it was always going to be a whole mountain to climb for them, especially bearing in mind that they had a man less. And eventually, Bosnia went through. So, but let's be honest, they also missed out on the 2018 edition. They missed out on the 2022 edition. So they must look back at themselves in the mirror and say, it's fallen so far that we need to find a way to get back up. After missing out on the World Cup in Russia, they came up in 2021 and won the Euro 2020, beating England on penalties in the final. That's there for the world to see. But like I said, it will be sporadic success if it continues to be that. Look at Sweden, a team that failed to win a single game in their World Cup qualifier games, then went through the window, which is based on their performances from the UEFA Nations League, that they go to the World Cup playoffs. And they managed to go through, beating Ukraine and Poland. But the ends will always justify the means. It will matter less to those Swedes or Sweden people what pipeline they went through to get to the World Cup. What will matter is that they are at the World Cup. It's that simple. So Italian Football Federation president down, head coach down, head of delegation down, So Raymond says Crystal Palace versus Newcastle, Glasner and Ed Howe, which manager will be sacked in the Premier League this? I do not think any of them is going to be sacked. I think both of them will be left to take charge of their respective teams until the end of the season. Oliver Glasner has already announced he will be leaving the club at the end of the season, so that's pretty much known. Then we know for a fact that they are still in the quarterfinals of the UEFA Conference League, and therefore that's an opportunity to win another piece of silverware for manager of Oliver Glasner's experience, who guided Eintracht Frankfurt in 2022 to the UEFA Europa League final and won it for them. And then last season won them their first major piece of silverware in beating Man City by 0-0 to win the FA Cup. So if you're Crystal Palace, regardless of what Oliver Glasner does between now and the end of the season, for as long as the team remains in the UEFA Conference League, your best bet is to stick with him until the end of the season. Because even sacking him now doesn't change much. It doesn't change much, really. So, yeah. You say after the derby loss to Sunderland, Ed Howe should be sacked from Newcastle, and now Xabi Alonso appointed. I don't think you're going to get Xabi Alonso. Unfortunately, I do not think you're going to get him. It's not impossible, but I do not see that happening. I do not see that happening. Oh, wow. What a strike. was just watching that first goal from Ousmane Dembele that he scored against this Tolu side, and what a strike that was! Brilliant strike. So Gennaro Gattuso is out of the way. The FA Federation president is out of the way, and now it's up to the Italians to answer the next call. Who will be the next Italy head coach? Are they going to look outwards like Brazil did? Are they going to continue to look inwards? Are they going to acknowledge that they need to go back to the drawing board and see how better to revive their game, That remains to be seen. We can only wait in anticipation. So, wow, this is quite interesting. It's coming in, breaking news coming in from the hand of Arsenal, very trusted source when it comes to Arsenal news. It says Noni Madueke has traveled with the Arsenal squad. As reported, the injury was deemed as minor after his initial scares. Remains to be seen if he makes the official matchday squad, but massively positive of Arsenal in the running for him to be available. Yeah, we spoke about that because we spoke about Bukayo Saka's form that hasn't been so great. So having Noni Madueke back in the team gives you that other channel, gives you that other option for you to play if you want to swap out a Bukayo Saka, so that is happening. Okay, Miguel Molina, they're celebrating the Arsenal Manager of the Month trophy that Mikel Arteta won there with Albert Stevenberg, Gabriel Hens, Nicolas Jova, is called Kana. I forget his other name. Kana, the goalkeeping coach, and Miguel Molina. That's a Arsenal's core coaching, a team, a cohort of 6 guys there. Okay. Let's see. Let's wait and see. Anyways, so that's regarding the Arsenal. That's regarding the Arsenal. So moving on. In regards to what else there is to come in the weekend. Wow. Anyways, we'll see. Let's see what else there is to come for you guys this weekend in terms of the action, so that you don't miss out on any. I told you action has kicked off today. PSG are up against Tolu. That game is still in the opening half. Elche is up against Rayo Vallecano. So that's what is happening. In the championship, there's been many games, but in the Spanish La Liga, you have Real Sociedad against Levante at 3 p.m. tomorrow. Mallorca against Real Madrid. Real Betis against Espanyol. The Real Madrid game will be at 5:15 p.m. While at 7:30 p.m. Real Betis against Espanyol. And at 10 p.m. Atletico de Madrid will be up against Barcelona. Then in the German Bundesliga, Bayer Leverkusen, remember it's going to be the Easter weekend. I do not know why majority of these games are just not played on Saturday. Anyways, I don't know if they have that great respect for Easter. Anyways, so Bayer Leverkusen up against Wolfsburg. All these games kick off at 4 p.m. Bayer Leverkusen against Wolfsburg, Borussia Mönchengladbach against Heidenheim, Freiburg against Bayern Munich, Hamburg SV against Augsburg, Hoffenheim against Mainz, while Werder Bremen will take on RB Leipzig, and at 7:30 p.m., VfB Stuttgart will be up against Borussia Dortmund. In the Italian Serie A, Sassuolo up against Cagliari at 4 p.m., while at 7 p.m., Hellas Verona will take on Fiorentina. Lazio at 9:45 p.m. will take on Parma, while Strasbourg in the French League One will be up against Nice at 6 p.m. At 8 p.m., Brest will take on Stade Rennes, while at 5 minutes past 10 p.m., Lille will be up against Stade Rennes. Then in the FA Cup, like I told you, I would touch upon these games. Chelsea versus Port Vale will come at 7 p.m. Excuse me, and at a quarter to 3 p.m., Liverpool will be taking on Manchester City. Then also Southampton will take on Arsenal at 10 p.m. East African time. So that's for the FA Cup. The other FA Cup will come, I think, at FA Cup game will come at 6:30 p.m. That will be on Sunday between West Ham and Leeds United. In the Spanish La Liga on Super Sunday, you have Getafe against Athletic Bilbao at 3 p.m. While at a quarter past 5 p.m., Valencia will take on Celta Vigo. Meanwhile, the game has headed into halftime between PSG and Toulouse. Rio Oviedo will be up against Sevilla at 7:30 p.m. While in the late kickoff at 10 p.m., it will be Deportivo Aves against Osasuna to wrap up match day 30 of the Spanish La Liga. In the German Bundesliga on Sunday at 4:30 p.m., Union Berlin will take on St. Pauli, while at 6:30 p.m., Eintracht Frankfurt will take on FC Cologne. In the Italian Serie A, Cremonese will take on Bologna at 4 p.m., while at 7 p.m., Pisa will take on Torino, and then at a quarter to 10 p.m., Inter will be up against AC Roma. Should be looking forward to watching that game. I think it will be the curtain raiser as I wait to watch the game between this is Sunday, sorry. Maybe as I wait to watch what game. Maybe Monaco against Marseille, but they kick off at the same time. In the French League One. The French League One on Super Sunday, Lyon are up against Angers at 4 p.m. At a quarter past 6 p.m., Le Havre will be up against Auxerre, while Lorient will be up against Paris FC at a quarter past 6 p.m. as well as Métis against Nantes. And then Monaco will entertain Marseille at 9:45 p.m. in as far as that fixture is concerned. So that's the gist of stories tonight. Of course, I will keep you abreast with all the developments that will come during the course of the weekend. Maybe on Sunday night, we are likely not to have our Sunday broadcast. It's Easter, guys. Am I not allowed to take an evening off, not even a day off? I think, because we do not do a Sunday morning broadcast. So, am I not allowed to? Is that what you're saying? But we will see. We'll see the circumstances, but most likely not. Most likely not. And then we'll return on Monday morning. That is Easter Monday. So yeah, keep it simply locked on the Football Tribe UG channel, and you will be getting all the events. Okay. Really? Guys, okay. Anyways, it's going to be a big weekend, especially in the Spanish La Liga. Real Madrid have a very difficult game against Vallecano, but as do Barcelona against Atletico de Madrid. And the tough part about that of Atletico de Madrid is because you have to play the same opponent in midweek in the UEFA Champions League. So so anyways, we'll have to wait and see. So it's been a pleasure doing this with you. Thank you so much, Raymond Kangumba, for always chipping in. Those of you that have been part of tonight's podcast, thank you so much. Even though majority of you did not submit your comments, but those of you that like the broadcast, we do appreciate you a great deal. Those that watch our broadcasts or live broadcasts long after they've ended, we do not take your love and support for granted. We do appreciate you a great deal. Those that have recently subscribed to the channel, thank you so much. Do not stop at subscribing. Go ahead and, watch all our content under the video section, under the short section, and help us continue to grow. As we speak, we are at about 4,292 subscribers. Go ahead and subscribe. Make it 4,300 and onwards and upwards. Then I can see we've had a bit of a drop in some of our watch figures over the last 48 hours. So guys, keep pushing, keep helping us, help pushing us to grow on this forum. So stay blessed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye and good night. See you tomorrow.